So hello everyone and welcome to our University College Cork Study of Religions Research Seminar Series. Today we're delighted to have Mriganka Mukhopadhyay, who is a lecturer in religious studies at Leiden University. He studied history at Presidency College in Kolkata and Ambedkar University in Delhi before pursuing a PhD from the University of Amsterdam. He's interested in the history of religions and esoteric currents in modern South Asia and their global intersections. He is currently finalizing his PhD dissertation titled The Occult World of Bengalis, Theosophy in Colonial South Asia and Its Global Entanglements, 1882 to 1942. Among other academic engagements, he is the book review editor of Correspondences, Journal for the Study of Esotericism, and a former student representative on the board of ESWE, the European Society for the Study of Western Esotericism. Before teaching at Leiden, he taught courses at the universities of Amsterdam and Vienna and published articles in reputed peer-reviewed journals. And today, he's going to talk to us about Bharat Samaj Puja, studying a theosophical ritual. So you're very welcome, Mriganka.
Thank you, Jenny, for this warm welcome. Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody can see my screen now.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Butler, to you, Jenny, for having me today. As some of you might know, who know my work, my primary research focus is on the Theosophical Society in India. The Theosophical Society, if you are familiar with the organization, was founded in New York City in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a Russian noblewoman who settled down in the US, and Henry Steele Olcott, a Civil War veteran, and they came together and in search for quote-unquote ancient divine wisdom, they founded the Theosophical Society. The organization, especially the founders of the organization, Blavatsky and Olcott, soon moved to India, attracted thousands of Indian members over decades, and the Theosophical Society deeply engaged with Indian religions, promoting Indian religious currents in the discourses of global occultism and alternative spiritualities and religions. My talk today, as you can understand from the title, will explore Bharat Samaj Puja, a ritual of the Theosophical Society in India, which remains mostly ignored so far in the academic scholarship. So in this talk, primarily explore first the historical background of the Bharat Samaj Puja. First, talking about the practices of the Theosophical Society. And after talking about the historical background and the description of the puja, I will come to what I call contemporary theosophical movement, how it looked like in the contemporary times. And towards the end of my talk, I will discuss that how, following the theory of Pierre Bourdieu, the Bourdieusian theory of capital, the Bharat Samaj Puja can be identified as a form of cultural capital for the theosophical movement. And this is part of my research where I promote this theoretical framework of theosophical capital that Indian society and various Indian currents have been used as social, cultural, and other forms of capital for the theosophical movement. However, before going to all these details, let me first start with a brief discussion about the relationship between the Theosophical Society and esoteric practices. So, historically speaking, there has been a greater attention to comparative study of religions and theoretical discussion within the Theosophical Society. Thus, one may find early Theosophists across the world focusing on discussion and dialogue about occultism, and less focus on practices or practicing occult in itself. However, even though the focus was less, it was not absolutely absent. And they were neither completely neglected. One such practice was astral projection, which was present within the Theosophical Society from its very early years. Many European and American Theosophists particularly became very interested in astral projection during the late 19th and early 20th century. Scholars such as Pat Devaney, Walter Hanegraaff, and Eric Karlstorm, among others, have studied astral projection within the Theosophical movement in great detail. As the debate of practical occultism was looming large in the occult circles during the 1880s, so several other esoteric and occult organizations were coming up, and they were talking about promoting practical occultism, and there was something called hermetic reaction that was happening in European and American occult esoteric circles, which was also trying to promote practical occultism. And during this context, Blavatsky created a unit called Esoteric Section of the Eastern School, in short, ES. The ES was established in 1888 and often identified as an inner group. This unit could be seen as a sort of a sanctum sanctorum of the physical organization of the Theosophical Society. Its activities remained quite discreet, and its access and membership was restricted to a selected few. The ES had a history of its own, and Annie Besant, the second president of the Theosophical Society, headed the group for a very long time. Like many Western members, several Indian members also joined the ES. The members of the ES were required to practice a vegetarian diet, refrain from alcoholism, and participate in certain practices like meditations, yogic practices, and also group prayers. However, practices such as astral projection or the activities of the ES were more internationalized or globalized, if you will. The Theosophical Society, as an organization headquartered in India, with a heavy concentration of Indian members, needed to develop practices and rituals that could directly cater to the upper caste Hindu members of the organization. And as you may know, the upper caste Hindu members were in the majority of the Theosophical Society. They primarily formed the largest part of the social capital, largest part of the human resources of the Theosophical Society. And thus, the TS, the Theosophical Society, came up with the Bharat Samaj Puja during the early 20th century, which I'm discussing today. Etymologically speaking, this term, Bharat Samaj Puja, can be translated as a ritual or ceremony performed for the Indian society. It is also spelled in a couple of other ways. So if you look through the theosophical literature, you would find spellings such as Bharata Samaj Puja or Bharata Samaja Puja, Puja sometimes spelled with a double O, so on and so forth. And of course, it's needless to say here, Bharat refers to India, Samaj refers to society, and Puja is a more generic term for a Hindu ritual or a Hindu ceremony. Now, you might ask that how Bharat Samaj Puja first originated. So in 1913, Annie Besant, the then president of the Theosophical Society, of course, the lady whom you can see here, and a prominent political figure in Indian nationalist circles, delivered her lecture series titled Wake Up India, whose cover you can see on screen. Besant was one of those leading figures who not only led the Theosophical Society and the Indian National Congress, she was the president of the Indian National Congress in 1917, but she also created anti-colonial political networks between India and Ireland, thus promoting the freedom struggle in both Indian and Irish context against British imperialism. Her lecture series titled Wake Up India, and she was delivering these lectures across the country, going to places in different parts of India. And these lectures motivated several Indians who were listening to her lecture, who were members of the Theosophical Society and even outside the Theosophical Society. And these members, these Indians, took up social and political activism by being motivated by Besant. And they wanted to do something for the national cause. A Tamil Theosophist called Manjari Rama Iyer wrote in an article in The Theosophist, the mouthpiece of the Theosophical Society, that Annie Besant's lecture series greatly inspired two other Tamil Theosophists called T. Sadasiva Iyer and T. Ramachandra Rao, who formed a group called the League of Liberal Brahmins, League of Liberal Brahmanas. I quote, the purpose of this group was to liberalize the great Brahmana caste, unquote. The formation of this organization made T. Ramachandra Rao, one of the two Tamil Theosophists involved in the project, a prominent figure among the Indian Theosophists. He was based in the province of Madras, which is now, of course, present-day Tamil Nadu. And he was soon rewarded with the position of the General Secretary of the Indian section of the Theosophical Society of India. And this happened in 1917, 1918, after he formed the League of Liberal Brahmanas. Manjari Iyer claimed in her article that the league mentioned above was later converted into Bharat Samaj and identified T. Ramachandra Rao as the founder of this group called Bharat Samaj. However, C. Jina Rajadasa, the notable Sri Lankan Theosophist and the later president of the Theosophical Society, gave a slightly different version regarding the background of the Bharat Samaj Puja. In the foreword to an article on Bharat Samaj Puja published in The Theosophist in 1948, he reported that in 1920, a group of Theosophists from South India formed the Bharata Samaj. This article was later reprinted as a booklet, and here he noted that the group was known as the League of the Children of India. So now we find a different name for the organization. And it also shows how there are multiple claims for the origin and the ownership of the group, ownership of the project, rather. Despite the conflicting claims regarding the origin, both these sources, the article by Manjari Iyer and the work published by Jina Rajadasa, both these sources unanimously report that the first major ritual of the Bharata Samaj Puja took place in Adyar, at the headquarters of the Indian Theosophical Society, in 1921. Manjari Rama Iyer described the inaugural event in the following words, and I quote her here. On the 26th of May, 1921, along with 5 Brahmana boys and a Brahmana girl, 2 European ladies partook on equal terms on the sacrament of Upanayanam, a Sanskrit word for sacred thread ceremony, with Pandit A. Mahadeva Shastri as the officiating priest, which certainly marks the beginning of a new era of Catholic Brahmanism. The above quotation shows that the puja allowed a participation of both Indians and Europeans, irrespective of gender. So you see 5 Brahmana boys and a Brahmin girl and 2 European women as well. Although a man was named as the quote-unquote officiating priest, in the earliest ritual, this would eventually change, and in contemporary context, one can find female priests leading the puja. Additionally, the predominance of Brahmanism here is quite worth noting, which indicates that the Theosophical Society had a fascination for the Brahmin caste, And this became very prominent in the South Indian context, where the Theosophical Society was seen as a Brahminical project. And if you're familiar with the politics of the Tamil speaking region of India, of South India, you might be familiar with the Dravidian politics, and many of the Dravidian activists later on in the early 20th century identified Annie Besant as an Irish Brahmin as well. So there was a conflict, there was an ideological tussle between Dravidian identity politics and the Brahminical politics, which apparently, according to the Dravidian politics, were promoted by the Theosophical Society. So some kind of caste politics was also going on, and the Bharat Samaj Puja and perhaps this league was also becoming representative of that caste politics. The phrase, however, in this context, the phrase Catholic Brahmanism is also quite a thought-provoking one. And one may wonder what could have been the purpose, what could have been the necessity to combine a Christian and a Hindu identity in the same phrase. Because it also shows a kind of a universalist outlook, universalist project of the Theosophical Society on the one hand, but also was a tendency, might be to, to create a broader, more appealing tendency towards the particular ritual, appealing to both Christians and Hindus. Moreover, the presence of the terms such as liberal in the previous name of the organization, and the use of the word Catholic here in Manjari Iyer's account indicates that C.W. Leadbeater and his liberal Catholic Church influenced this movement from the very beginning. And Leadbeater, as you may know, if you are familiar with the Theosophical Society's history, that became a very important figure in Annie Besant's time, and he was controlling many things from behind the scenes, sometimes also very publicly. In 1925, Leadbeater and his followers formally took over the control of the Bharat Samaj Puja and turned it into an official program of the Theosophical Society. And hence, in this stone in the temple itself, you can see the date 21st December 1925. With Leadbeater and Jina Rajadasa's support, Jiddu Krishnamurti, whose name you can also see here on the stone, and Krishnamurti at that point was still associated with the Theosophical Society, he became very actively involved with the Bharat Samaj Puja. Its first public event happened, as the date shows here, on 21st of December 1925, under the leadership of Krishnamurti, who was ably assisted and supported by Leadbeater and Jina Rajadasa. In the introduction, and here, of course, you can see Krishnamurti sitting with Leadbeater and Besant was the person who was promoting Krishnamurti as the next world teacher. In the introduction to a manual of the Bharat Samaj Puja, published in 1948, C. Jina Rajadasa wrote that the rituals for the puja were designed in 1925 by Krishnamurti under the tutelage of Leadbeater. Jina Rajadasa claimed that Krishnamurti's enterprise in writing the hymns for the Bharata Samaj Puja took everyone by surprise, reportedly because he hardly knew any Sanskrit and was also averse to rituals. Jina Rajadasa claimed that Krishnamurti wrote down the hymns of the Bharata Samaj Puja with assistance from two other Tamil Theosophists, P.K. Thilan and A. Mahadev Shastri, the same A. Mahadev Shastri who was the officiating priest for the first ritual, if you can recall. Although Krishnamurti was supposedly unfamiliar with Sanskrit, Mahadeva Shastri himself was a Sanskrit scholar, and at that point was functioning as the director of the Adya Library and Research Center, also based in the same compound of the Theosophical Society. The hymns were also translated later into English by Leadbeater, and of course was later published by Jinarajadasa, as you can see. Leadbeater was present at the early performances of the ritual, reportedly observing them clairvoyantly and taking notes which were used to prepare colored illustrations of the temple thought form, which were published in the journal The Theosophist in April 1926. And he also greatly influenced the final text of the ritual. So here you can see the temple thought form, the colored impression of the temple, which was supposedly created by Leadbeater. And based on this particular temple thought form, the actual temple was built. And this was also a floor plan of the temple, based on which the temple was. And Gina Rajadasa's book gives out this floor plan in the manual. And the temple complex is quite big. There is just one temple, as you can see here, but you have to enter through an entrance, and it looks quite colorful from outside as well. Subsequently, Theosophists from other Indian regions also became involved with the ritual. So for instance, you would find Theosophists, so it's of course started in Adyar, but many Tamil and Telugu Theosophists became very actively involved with the Bharat Samaj Puja. Also, since I have studied for my doctoral dissertation, I've studied the Theosophical movement in Bengal very closely. I would also like to say a few things about the situation in Bengal, where Hirendranath Datta, this individual whose picture you can see here, one of the leading Bengali Theosophists from the 20th century, who was also the international vice president of the Theosophical Society in 1940s. He was appointed as the president of the Bharat Samaj Association in the 1930s, so around 10 years after the formation of the Bharat Samaj Puja Association. This organization was formed to foster the Bharat Samaj Puja and was associated with Vedic ideals of the TS. So there is also a sense of reviving the Vedic ideals, as you can understand by the use of the hymns. And I will come to this aspect of revivalism later as well. During Datta's tenure as the president of the Bharat Samaj Association, the Raja of Benares, the king of Benares, donated a piece of land for the building of the Bharat Samaj temple in the Indian headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Benares. So if you go to the Indian section of the Theosophical Society, which is located in the city of Benares, you will also find another smaller temple of the Bharat Samaj Puja. During the 20th century, like other parts of India, it was a common practice to organize the ritual of the Bharat Samaj Puja in various lodges. The Bengal Theosophical Society Lodge, which I have studied extensively, also performed this ritual in the early morning and published monthly program leaflets. And this activities continued through the 1960s as well. I located some leaflets from 1960s which recorded the performance of early morning ceremony in the lodge, the Bengal Theosophical Society Lodge. Subsequently, the Bharata Samaj Puja manual was translated and published in other languages too. For instance, in Assamese, the manual was translated, and here you can see the manual's cover in Assamese language. And of course, there were similar manuals in Tamil, in Telugu, in Hindi as well as in Bengali. So it was becoming very pan-Indian, even though the Bharata Samaj Puja did not develop much of an attention or much of an interest across Europe. So I doubt, and so far I haven't come across any manuals in any European languages for that matter. Now I would try focus on a few features that comes across quite clearly through studying the Bharat Samaj Puja. And first of this is revivalism and nationalism. It is worth noting that the ritual of the Bharat Samaj Puja was designed specifically for Indian members and was mostly conducted in the centers and branches in India. The Bharat Samaj Puja neither found much attention, as I said, among the Indian, European, or American Theosophists, nor it became a subject of critical scholarly research in theosophical practices. Nevertheless, this particular ritual is one of the best examples which suggest how the Theosophical Society promoted Vedic revivalism in the Indian subcontinent and globalized theosophy as an Indian current as well. It also emerged as a part of the Theosophical Society's Orientalist and Hindu revivalist thought. And the time when the Bharat Samaj Puja is originating, is developing, is also very interesting here. This is the early 20th century, is the time of nationalism, when the national identity politics, the Hindu identity politics is developing very strongly. And maybe it is very important to situate the Bharat Samaj Puja in the backdrop of this Hindu identity politics that is emerging in the early 20th century. It also took the ritualization and sacralization of theosophy to a different level by making the current a collective, communitarian, ritualistic practice. So there were mass congregation. When I will discuss the ritual, you will see that there were aspects of mass congregation. So it was more of collective ritual in that sense. It can be seen as an appropriation of the Vedic ideals as part of the theosophical practices. The said ritual also defined the reenactment of a Vedic life in 20th century India, and such actions contributed to cultural nationalism of India. Of course, as I was trying to say, the context of Hindu revivalism is important here. And this is the important backdrop under which we need to understand the context of revivalism and nationalism in the 20th century. And also, most of the leading members, participants of the puja were upper caste Brahmins, Brahmins and Kayasthas sometimes, mostly upper caste members of the upper caste Hindu members of the Theosophical Society. Now I will say a few things about the ritual of the Bharat Samaj Puja, which has been performed in the same way since the 1920s until the contemporary period. It was designed as a ceremony that was supposed to be performed at dawn. And since its beginning, it has been conducted as a mass congregation, either in the Bharat Samaj temple of Adyar or Benares, or in the lodges of the Theosophical Society across India. So you cannot see too many people here, but people usually sit on either side of this Sanctum Sanctorum, and they say the prayers, say the hymns together. It must be clarified, and as you can see also in the picture, that there is no idol, no deity, which is worshipped in the Bharat Samaj temple. It's just a fire lit inside and Sanskrit, and on the top of this basement, on the top of this dais, the white marble podium. And yeah, that's all. That particular fire is worshipped. The fire on top of the medium-sized altar, and the fire and the flame is lit every morning, of course. And this flame is considered to be a representation of the divine power and is prayed with the chant of a series of Sanskrit mantras. This is the same set of mantras that were written by Krishnamurti, allegedly. And it still continues to be recited. Remarkably, worshipping a fire altar, and this is interesting, could also remind one of a Zoroastrian rite of fire worship. So And as you may know, the Theosophical Society in India particularly involved many Parsi members, many Zoroastrian members, and the idea of Zoroastrian fire worship, it could have been possible that the Theosophists also picked up this idea of fire worship from the Zoroastrian supporters of the Theosophical Society in India. However, the literature itself do not suggest if there was any Zoroastrian influence in the Bharat Samaj Puja. So this is, you can say, more of my speculation, that there could have been a fusion of Hindu and Zoroastrian rites, and which cannot be ruled out, of course, considering the organization's universalist worldview, and as I was trying to say earlier, a fascination for Zoroastrianism. The mass recital of the Vedic hymns and the burning flame in the temple altar and the series of rituals conducted at dawn create quite a spectacle, to be honest. And as someone, I actually, while I was doing my field work in Adyar back in 2019, I also witnessed this ritual very early in the morning when all the Theosophists living in the compound who gather in the temple go very early there, and they sit down together and recite the prayer. And this is, of course, the altar that I was mentioning. The photograph is a bit blurry, and you can see the Om, the same Sanskrit sign, which is also there in the Theosophical logo. The principal hymn of the Bharat Samaj Puja is the Gayatri Mantra, which is also a very Brahmanical mantra, which is chanted along with a few other hymns. While chanting the mantras, the devotees touch various bodies' chakra terminals, acknowledging the connection between the human spirit and the divine, the supernatural being. One can argue that by worshipping the flame on the altar instead of a deity, the second generation of the Theosophists also upheld Blavatsky's ideology of following an impersonal God instead of a personal God. And now I would like to show you the temple short video. The video itself is quite long, but this I want to show just a few minutes in the beginning where you can see the temple from the top and also some early recitals of the hymns.
Mriganka, I'm just wondering, are we supposed to be hearing sound from the video?
Yes.
Yeah,
don't you hear sound?
You need to what I usually do is share it again. If you close your PowerPoint and then open the video and share it again, and there's a little button to include computer sound.
All right. Okay, so perhaps now I've stopped sharing. So, and where is this button?
So when you press share,
yes,
you should see a little
include
option,
sound.
Include computer sound. Yeah.
Yeah. You see my screen again, right?
Yes.
All right. So can you hear the sound now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry.
हरिः ॐ अपवित्रः पवित्रो वा सर्वावस्थाङ्गतोऽपि वा यस्मरेत् पुण्डरीकाक्षं सबाह्याभ्यन्तरशुचिः। ॐ सूर्यश्च मामन्युश्च मन्युपतयश्च मन्युकृतेभ्यः पापेभ्यो रक्षन्तां यद्रात्र्या पापमकार्षं मनसा वाचा ताभ्यां पद्भ्यां मुदरेण शिष्णा रात्रिस्तदपलुम्पतु यत्किञ्च दुरितं मयि इदमहं माममृतयो नो सूर्ये ज्योतिषि जुहोमि स्वाहा। ॐ आगमार्थं तु देवानां गमनार्थं तु रक्षसां कुर्वे घण्टारवं तत्र देवताह्वानलाञ्छनम् अपसर्पन्तु ते भूता ये भूता भूमि संस्थिताः ये भूता विघ्नकर्तार ते गच्छन्तु शिवाज्ञया अपक्रामन्तु भूतानि पिशाचाः सर्वतो दिशम् सर्वेषामविरोधेन ब्रह्मकर्म समारभे। ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः। ॐ येन देवा पवित्रेण आत्मानं पुनते सदा तेन सहस्रधारेण पावमान्यः पुनन्तु मा प्राजापत्यं पवित्रं शतोद्यामं हिरण्मयं तेन ब्रह्मविदो वयं भूतं ब्रह्म पुनीमहे इन्द्रसुनीति सहमा पुनातु सोमस्वस्त्यावर्ण समीच्या यमो राजा प्रमुणाभिः पुनातु मा जातवेदा मूर्जयन्ता पुनातु। ॐ भूः ॐ भुवः ॐ सुवः ॐ महः ॐ जनः ॐ तपः ॐ सत्यम् ॐ तत्सवितुर्.
Well, the ritual goes on, like he keeps on reciting the mantras for almost an hour, like for several minutes, actually. It is also edited in many ways. I want just to show you that this is, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, it's not only the officiating priest is not only a male, it could also be a woman. And here you can see that in the later part of the video, there is a woman who appears and she also does the recitation.
On a definite plan. There has been a slight rearrangement. Then the officiant follows the adoration of the Supreme in the form of light, with the worshipper standing and reciting in union the Purusha Sukta, the celebrated Vedic hymn. As it ends, the officiant offers lighted camphor before the holy flame as Harati, reciting appropriate prayers. The burning camphor is brought to each worshipper, who holds his palm with above the flame for a moment and then draws blessing to himself by placing the palms over his face. The adoration continues while flowers are distributed to everyone, and all, including the officiant, recite the Vedic hymn Sagrasasirusham Devam, extolling and picturing the omnipresence, omnipotent, and omniscience of the Supreme Being.
Well, this continues. Like there are also English translations which are sometimes read out, especially when there are foreign participants, and during the annual conventions, particularly when people, Theosophists across the world, come and visit their You would often find European and American Theosophists also joining the congregation briefly for a day or two. And sometimes there are translations in that sense. But this particular ritual was recorded in 2021 during the lockdown in May. And then I think it was only the people in Adair who mostly attended this particular recording. There are other similar recitations also, which you might find over the internet and also on YouTube if you look up for Bharat Samaj Puja. I want to say now a few things because my time is also running out. I want to say a few things in conclusion. Yeah, so my first point, my first concluding remark is about cultural nationalism. The rituals, it's more of an observation here, following my analysis, you could say. The ritual's origin, as suggested earlier, must be seen in the context of cultural nationalism of early 20th century colonial India, as well as the Hindu identity politics. And I argue that the esoteric practices, the occultist practices, like any other movements, do not operate in vacuum. And they needs to be situated within a larger social, cultural, and intellectual history of their time. Thus, the political dimension of the Bharat Samaj Puja cannot be ignored. Although it's a theosophical ritual, but there is a larger political implication of that ritual. Number two, although this particular movement originated in colonial India, it still continues to be performed in Indian lodges. So it has a wider transition to post-colonial times. Thus, the practice sheds light on contemporary theosophical movement and could be seen as part of contemporary esotericism. And as you might know, if you're familiar with the field of esotericism studies, contemporary esotericism is a very widely discussed subject within the field. And there are anthropological studies about various contemporary esoteric movements. Thus, I identify the Bharat Samaj Puja as part of what I call contemporary theosophy, which could be seen as a subcategory within contemporary esotericism. It opens an avenue for studying the theosophical movement with an anthropological approach using ethnography as a methodology. So far, the theosophical movement, which is largely seen as a very historical project, has been studied with historical approaches. So there is a scope to go beyond that historical approach, and there is a scope to use ethnography for studying contemporary theosophy. The ethnographic study of the theosophical movement is unusual, as I said, as it has been studied with a historical approach. During my research on the Bharat Samaj Puja, I participated in this ceremony twice, so doing some kind of ethnographical research. And my analysis, my observation is partly based on the textual analysis of the documents that I have studied in the Theosophical archives, as well as to some extent on the basis of participant observation. Point number three, contemporary theosophy, of course. And point number three is that the rituals such as Bharat Samaj Puja created a distinct national character of the Indian theosophical movement, which separated the Indian section from its Western counterparts. I argue this was a deliberate attempt to provincialize theosophy. This provincialization was related to the formation of a globally entangled history of modern esotericism. And finally, the uniqueness of the puja suggests that a cultural appropriation of the Indian religions was happening within the theosophical discourse. I argue that this phenomena can be explained through an application of French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's theory of cultural capital. Previously, Bourdieu's theory of capital have been successfully applied by scholars such as Hugh Urban and Bradford Werter for studying various esoteric movements. I do the same in my doctoral dissertation, and I coined this term theosophical capital through my doctoral research. I'm not going into the details of the Bordeusian conceptualization. In a nutshell, I argue that the Theosophical movement capitalized on various Indian religions, which I see as cultural capital. And as one of the resources or a form of Theosophical capital, they collectively contributed in providing the Theosophical movement a greater success in South Asia than elsewhere around the world. I suggest that the Theosophical Society internalized elements from Indian religions, such as recitation of Vedic hymns in this context, and converted them into a cultural capital in an embodied and institutionalized state. The Bharat Samaj Puja, thus, with its religious features, became a part of that cultural capital of the Theosophical movement. It introduced practices and rituals in the Indian context and attracted upper caste Hindu Indian members with an allure of a puja. Overall, it was quite a smart move on the part of the Theosophical Society for its successful propagation in South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mriganka. So if people have questions or comments, you can either raise your hand or type in the chat. I know there's a comment from Aaron saying that Aaron has to leave, but to tell you it was a rich and fascinating talk. So Aryan,
yeah,
you have your hand.
That will be me. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Well, Mriganka, thank you very much for this very often overlooked part of theosophy. We really tend to focus a lot on kind of the intellectual history and the doctrines, and not so much on the performed practices. So this was really enriching, I think, for the whole field of theosophical studies. So I was wondering, so the Bharat Samaj Puja is called, or the Theosophists decided to call it the Puja, which is quite interesting because if you would look at a Vedic context, which they kind of, well, they're trying to to gain this authorization by referring to a Vedic context, but in a Vedic context you would not call it a puja, but you would rather kind of call it a yajna instead of a puja. So I was kind of wondering about that. Do you know what the reasons are why they decided to take the term puja instead of yajna, for example? Is that just for the recognizability of the term puja, or are there other reasons behind that? What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Aryan. First of all, I'm sorry, I actually just got logged out while stopping the sharing option. So perhaps if I do not know if I missed out on any part of your question, but what I understood that you were asking why it is not a yagna but a puja. That's right. So yes, that's a very interesting question. The literature actually do not use the word yagna. So maybe there is a sense of sacrifice with yajna, like with use of meat as well, with human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, or even like vegetable sacrifice. And that doesn't happen here. There is only a recital of Vedic hymns, which is very central to the ritual. People sit around the fire, and also, of course, the fire reminds of a yajna, but at the same time, it's interesting that the fire is not lit in one of those square tables in which a yajna fire is usually lit. So you see a higher altar, which actually reminds of a Zoroastrian ritual, right? Because the fire ritual in Hindu yajnas are in a different kind of in a different way, So that's why I say that it could be seen also as a fusion of a Zoroastrian rite and the Hindu rite, So that's why maybe they are not consciously using yajna. It could also be because that yajna is a more difficult word and puja is more easier to pronounce and attract more Theosophists from Europe and America, and maybe Leadbeater himself was not familiar with the word yajna. I'm just speculating here, but the word doesn't appear that much. Yeah, thank you.
Any other, Marina? You can hand up.
Thank you so much for an amazing talk, and I'm just so excited to read your dissertation. And I was especially just absolutely happy to hear that you're using Bourdieu in a completely innovative fashion, because my background is in literary studies, and so I used him in relation to literary processes before. But this is just so exciting, and I'm really just so happy to hear this, and really curious how you'll go about it. And you mentioned at the beginning that the first phase of Theosophical Society was more interested in theory rather than practice, and correct me if I'm misunderstood that, but where would you place this shift that happened? Because I have my idea, but I'm curious to hear what you think, if we can actually figure out when the shift happened towards practical side of things or practices versus just reading and studying.
Thank you, Marina. I think that's a very important issue within the Theosophical movement, because also if you look at the scholarship, and also the historical writings, the official histories of the Theosophical Society, there are more focus on the theoretical discussions, what kind of dialogues that were happening in the lodges, articles, and the commentaries on those articles, translations, so on and so forth. As far as the practices are concerned, astral projection, as Devaney or Hanegraaff or even Eric Karlstorm in his recent MA dissertation would argue, these have been there for a very long time, from the very beginning, actually, from 1880s, if not 1870s. And as I said, with the coming of esoteric section in the 1880s, there was a growing interest for practices, but that was restricted to a smaller group. It did not, became very far and wide. It was global, it was international. You would find people from across various parts of the world, from Theosophists from various lodges, federations, international sections participating in these practices. But it was not very widely known. And you would often find many Theosophists, many people joining the Theosophical Society, but leaving the Theosophical Society out of a frustration that they do not practice occultism. This is more about discussion and theories. And this frustration was often noted down in articles in the Theosophist as well. I think so. The transition did not entirely happen. The Theosophical Society predominantly remained a very theory-oriented, discussion-oriented organization. But time and again, there were instances where there are practices such as astral projection on the one hand, such as yogic practices, meditations in the esoteric section. And of course, to cater a larger Indian crowd, upper caste Hindu Indian crowd, you find these kind of rituals like the Bharat Samaj Puja that can draw people from India and connect them with the movement. Yeah, so it was a kind of a parallel current that was developing, continuing within the Theosophical Society.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that answers my question. But I also have another one, because it feels like earlier on there was a prohibition, almost a prohibition on any kind of ritual magic, and that's what you mentioned. People were frustrated and went elsewhere to learn and practice all those other things. And so I'm curious if you see it as a kind of more acceptance of those practices with the shift towards practice or practical expressions or not. I don't know if that's formulated clearly, but
shift in India, you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I do not see any interest in ritual magic among the Indian members that much. At least the people whom I have studied,
Right.
Of course, there were people interested in Tantra, if you count that within the larger discourse on theosophical appropriation of magic, that's a different story altogether.
Yeah, it's a huge question, obviously. Yeah, so but I'm curious. Yeah.
Right, but as far as these kind of practices are concerned, I think Leadbeater also have an important role here, because he's someone who is interested in clairvoyance, who's interested in certain practices, although in a very limited sense.
Yeah,
he had a role to play in terms of involving or motivating people like Jena Rajadasa and Krishnamurti, the South Asian Theosophists, to perform, to actively engage in the rituals. So Leadbeater is the man who's pulling the strings from behind in this context.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you again for the talk.
Thank you, Marina.
And a final question from Jacqueline.
You are muted.
That's unmuted now. Yeah, okay. I'm fascinated by the Leadbeater connection and the Mahadeva Shastri connection. You showed us two pictures of the Leadbeater visualizations of the temple. Were they simply his imagination of how the temple should be constructed, which actually doesn't look anything like what the Adya temple actually is built as? Or were these visualizations that were meant to be performed as part of the ritual? In other words, I'm really struggling to make the connections between esoteric practice and what's actually just going on there, in terms of, they're sitting there, chanting Vedic mantras or Vedic-like mantras of various kinds. What's particularly esoteric about this, other than that it's being done by people who identify as a Theosophical Society? And how does that play into the discourse of the cultural nationalist and local Dravidian politics between Brahmins and anti-Brahmin movements in South India? I'd really like to know more about the esotericism of the ritual, if there is any, and its embeddedness in those cultural politics.
Right. Well, right. There are multiple layers to this, like, of course, first of all, Leadbeater's imagination of the thought form, it was his imagination. The temple was created in a different way, definitely. Yeah. But as far as the rituals esoteric part is concerned, I think the Theosophists, the leadership of the Theosophical Society, particularly people like Leadbeater or Besant maybe, they wanted to perceive any performance of ritual, any practice as esoteric. So Theosophical Society, Theosophy as an esoteric, as a modern representation of Western esotericism in that sense. But in the Indian context, of course, for the Indian Theosophists, this is nothing esoteric. This is more of a normalized, regularized Hindu ritual. And the Theosophical Society is helping them to perform that Hindu ritual. So there are two different kinds of agendas that are going on here. And that is what I always try to emphasize, that the agenda of the Indian Theosophists and the agenda of the American or European Theosophists might not be same. The understanding of the understanding of esotericism in the European context might not mean anything esoteric for the Indian context. So they are the upper caste Hindu Theosophists who are participating in the ritual. They are participating from the perspective of using Hindu identity as a political, cultural tool, and the Theosophical Society is helping them to use that Hindu identity. And that is also very caste-based, because this is a very Brahminical ritual, right? And on the other hand, you won't find too many Dravidian members of the Theosophical Society in the Tamil context. And they were trying to respond to the Theosophical Society. They were trying to see the Theosophical Society as a Brahminical project. So that caste politics is there. But the Theosophical Society, the Tamil Theosophists were not directly responding to the Dravidian members, but that also needs further research. I haven't looked in my research into the Dravidian context, into the Tamil context, but there is a huge future scope to talk about this. But in terms of using esoteric as a category, using esotericism as a category, or understanding the agenda of the Indian and the European Theosophists, that could be vastly different. And performances, practices like this actually help us to understand how the discourse could be different in different cultural and geographical contexts.
Yeah, so can I press you on that? Is there time, Jenny? So when Leadbeater is visualizing this temple, is he thinking he's visualizing it as a context for esoteric practices, or is he thinking he's visualizing it as a context for ensuring that his funding base and his support base in India is actually, you know, going to operate in a context in which they're familiar? And when the European and American people visit the Theosophical Society in a contemporary context and participate in that puja, what are they doing? And do we know if they have a different agenda in so doing, or are they just generally identifying with, oh, this is what's going on in India, let's go and do part of it?
I think in contemporary times the latter is more true. You know, like it's simply like a European or American tourist going to India, if they're allowed to enter to a temple, entering the temple and sitting down for a ritual. That's exactly what a European Theosophist would do if they end up during the annual convention in the puja. They do not, as far as I understand, for them it's just a spectacle. They do not have any particular agenda as such. For Leadbeater, the conceiving of this temple form, the thought form itself is an esoteric practice because it comes through his clairvoyance.
Yeah.
So, and when he's conceiving it, when he's promoting this practice, urging Krishnamurti and Jinarajadasa to take it up further, he's trying to push forward his agenda of promoting an esoteric practice.
That's what I'd love you to tell me about.
Well, yeah, but what he's trying to do, maybe Krishnamurti and Jinarajadasa are not thinking in the same direction. Or maybe someone like Mahadeva Shastri, he's not thinking in the same direction. They are just trying to promote it. They are trying to see this ritual as a more Hindu Vedic practice, you know, just a set of hymns, just a ritual. For them, it's a kind of using Hinduism as a ritual identity, you know. So, you know, like a political cultural identity. Theosophical Society is helping them to promote this political cultural identity through a larger universalist discourse. They do not.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Okay, so I know it's a very interesting discussion, but we've run over time, and hopefully we can continue it elsewhere. So thank you very much, Mriganka, and I will just stop the recording now.
Thank you, Jen.